back to CrimsonCast. Galen, Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you Monday, March 16th. Scott, happy spring break for those who are celebrating. And you drove around Indiana today. What did you find?
Snow. Lots. I did not find spring break. I looked around. I'm like the groundhog. What did I find? I did whatever the shadow gives me more winter. That's
yeah.
I always forget which one it is, shadow or no shadow. But I found blizzard conditions.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. If it's sunny and he sees his shadow, it's 6 more weeks of winter. If it's cloudy and he doesn't see a shadow, then it's an early spring, even though the date of Groundhog Day is exactly 6 weeks before actual first day of spring.
I'm often wondering, like the early spring, it's not like spring's tomorrow. It's not like spring starts February 3rd.
Right. The whole thing is like a psyop. You know, it's like I actually think that Groundhog Day was trying to get at it and was trying to reveal the truth, the movie, I mean. Yeah. And they ended up like having to pull punches, like Harold Ramis, like they pulled, the State Department pulled him in, is like, look, we can't have you destroying the image. So then they turned it into this like coming of age story for Bill Murray's character instead. But there's some real like intense stuff behind the scenes going on with this, because it tricks everybody every year when it really doesn't matter, because there's always 6 more weeks of winter regardless of what the damn groundhog sees.
Well, it's true. I would say it's a bad psyop because it's not like it's that popular. Like, because on one hand, I'm thinking like it is a marketing, like it's just a created marketing holiday, but like you guys could do better. Like at least Valentine's Day, everyone knows it. Everyone's buying gifts. And like there's very few, but it is having kids, like kids get into Groundhog's Day. Like they are deep into it but even for them, it's that day.
What does being deep into Groundhog Day entail, Scott?
They want to watch the groundhog and then they're done. So like that's the problem.
Is there like merch?
No, this is Groundhog Day's problem. It needs more of an ancillary. They need more of a cinematic universe. Like they need to build off of.
That's where I was going to go with it. Like, could it be a mystery animal every year?
Oh, like next year's a giraffe,
right? Like, or maybe it's off the board, like it's an ocelot or something like that.
Or like a chupacabra.
I mean, let's be honest, a giraffe in Western Pennsylvania would probably not be, that'd be a little conspicuous. It would be a little odd if a giraffe just popped up and.
Oh, that's the fun. And like,
it's the opposite of the what the hell is a polar bear doing in Arlington, Texas meme, right? It's I was trying to go with more indigenous animals, but yeah,
you have to go off the board, or you make it like the Chinese calendar, where it's just like the groundhog's every 7th year, and then you just have a rotating cast of animals. And it's like, oh, dude, like the giraffe is like 5 for 5 in the last 5 years, seeing its shadow. Like, are we gonna do it again?
The winter of the warthog or something like that. Yeah, I like that idea.
If you want a fun deep dive, I mean, Groundhog's Day, the movie, or Groundhog Day, the movie is fantastic. I love that movie. Dig into the details of that, like having to film the same day over and over again ended up like it ruined the like Harold Ramis and Bill Murray's friendship like ended during that movie. Like there's just some great stories about how like they all went mentally insane making that movie.
Well, and like Murray got attacked by the groundhog multiple times because as it turns out, groundhog's not easily domesticated. And, you know, you're doing like, he's got it on its lap, you know, on his lap for a while in the driving scene. There was a lot in that movie. I've done the deep dive on Groundhog Day, and I like the movie personally. I think it's funny. I think it's one of Murray's kind of underrated performance. Maybe not. It might actually be properly rated, but it is an odd idea for a film, and B, it's like to do that many shots with a live groundhog is it. In the annals of animals in movies, I'm not sure that will go down as the greatest of ideas.
Agreed.
So,
Ned? Needle-Nose Ned?
Oh, yeah.
Ned Ryerson?
No,
anyway, you know, we buried the lead. So this is really, you know, we're starting the Groundhog Day podcast network. We decided that we're done talking basketball. We're just going off we're talking holidays. We're talking groundhogs. It's a whole new CrimsonCast. Welcome aboard, people.
This was what I was really doing on that trip to Penn State. We gave cover by stopping in Indiana, Pennsylvania. We were really visiting Punxsutawney to lay the foundation for this new network.
I think I've told you, I'm not sure I brought this up on the pod. We're doing a summer road trip with the family. We did Mount Rushmore a couple years ago. My oldest at the time was a 4th grader. You get the pass for all the national parks. it's not like it's like $10 it saves you.
It's fine. Yeah.
We got it this year for our youngest, who's in 4th grade. So we're driving to Acadia from here to Maine. And on the way back, we are spending a night near Punxsutawney. And I want to go see Punxsutawney, partially more because of the movie, but I want to go see where the Groundhog comes out. And it's like we've set aside a good 90 minutes of our drive home. But it's like Punxsutawney feels like such an Americana place to be. So I will give a full report that come the end of this July on what Punxsutawney is like.
Let us know. Well, we'll be waiting with bated breath. So, if you would like to properly outfit yourself for that trip, Scott, you're going to go to Home Field Apparel. I mean, if you're traveling through to Maine and back, you're going to be hitting a lot of states that have Division I sports teams.
Yes.
And you're going to want to outfit yourself properly. And what better place to do that than Home Field Apparel? The place to go for the finest in not Groundhog fashion, but certainly the rest.
I mean, they keep coming up with new stuff. Maybe they'll have a great Groundhog Day collection next year.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. No.
Yeah.
You can go to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23 and get 15% off your first order. Be sure to visit them online and also follow them on social. Homefield Apparel on Instagram, Homefield Apparel on Twitter. And they even have an IU-specific imprint on Twitter, Homefield_IU. Be sure to follow along. And we thank Homefield Apparel for their sponsorship of the network. We'd also like to thank Posh Hotel Bloomington, the finest in luxury accommodations here in Bloomington, right at the corner of Kirkwood and Washington Streets, right downtown. You can see downtown from there. You can walk to Uptown. You can walk down the street to the sample gates and be right there on campus.
You can be on the patio and see your shadow or not see your shadow, just like the Groundhog.
That's what I was going to say. You can go all these places, but you're not going to want to leave the luxurious accommodations of the room that you're going to be staying in at Posh Hotel Bloomington. So go to poshhotelbloomington.com, follow them on Instagram, and we look forward to hearing how your next stay goes at Posh Hotel. Book the dates now for football if you can, folks. They're going fast. And finally, we'd like to thank our third sponsor for the show. The company is called Atlas of Memories Travel Co., and you can find it on Facebook. Mesa Stillwell, a certified travel agent, has the training, resources, and trusted partnerships to get you the best value for your needs. She handles the details, personalized one-on-one travel agency service at no extra costs, as she is paid by the travel suppliers, and has worked with a variety of vendors, including Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Viking Cruise Lines, Club Med, and Sandals, amongst others. Give her a call, 812-403-2213, or just message on Facebook. Again, Mesa Stillwell, Atlas of Memories, Travel Co.
And she has all the Punxsutawney hotels in her Rolodex.
I would think so, yes. Does Sandals, this is a Sandals Punxsutawney, right?
I did Google like a all-inclusive resorts Punxsutawney, and just Google's like, you didn't see a shadow. Next. Just moving on.
So we're back. And Scott, last time we podcasted, the season wasn't over yet officially. Well, the season's over now officially, as Indiana did not make the NCAA tournament, and they were closer than I think some people thought they would be. They ended up being the 4th team out. They had, of course, Auburn was in front of them. I think New Mexico was in front of them, and San Diego State. There was another team that was in the mix. Oklahoma was the other one. But Indiana was not as far off as one might have thought that they would have been, given how the season ended.
Right.
And so there's kind of two ways to look at that. On the one hand, it's like, well, that stinks. It's a shame that Indiana was that close but didn't make it. On the other hand, as bad as the bubble was this year, not making it into the tournament, especially when not making the tournament really seemed to come down to two things for Indiana, one of which was the 2 losses to Northwestern, and the other was the blowouts to Illinois and Purdue, and to a lesser extent Ohio State, which really kind of screwed Indiana's power metrics, their predictive metrics like Ken Pom and Torvik. That seemed to be big problems for Indiana in terms of being able to make it into the field. And so it's water under the bridge now. You can't do anything about it, but it is worth revisiting some of the things we talked about last week about how frustrating this season's end was, and how it's hard to believe that 6 weeks ago we were sitting around looking at this team and being like, all right, I think they actually can make the tournament. And then they end up being on the outside looking in. I know you were not expecting them to be on the inside. So when you saw the news or heard the news, what was your reaction?
Not shocked. I was shocked that they were in the first 4 out. I thought they were just going to be out of that. And it's almost, I mean, not making it as bad, but it's almost more frustrating to know that you're that close, because everything you said is right on reasons they could have made it. I will also throw in the kind of lifeless loss at Minnesota on December 3rd, the losing a 15-point lead to Nebraska at home. Any one of those things goes differently, and you're probably in the tournament.
Yeah.
It's just like you were that close. But in the end, nobody's going to remember, nor should they. It's like, well, like there is no, you were really close to not making it. Like you just either make it or you don't. And this is where in, college football, when it was 4 teams, now it's 12. You can look at somebody who doesn't make it and be like, man, they have a legitimate beef to be pissed based on this, that, or that. I've always felt like, you can be on the bubble and it's like you could have a case, but in the end, like everyone who was in the bubble had multiple chances to get themselves in the tournament. So it's not like Indiana or anybody got kind of jobbed. I've never felt like anybody gets screwed out of the tournament. It's like you've had a lot of chances to get there, and we just laid out all of the cases. And there's even a world, like you said, you can keep all your losses as losses, and maybe you just keep it a little bit closer against Louisville, Illinois, and Purdue, and maybe that just gets you metrically close enough to get in. That to me is the frustrating part, and the thing that I'll keep in my memory for a little bit is just you were so close. Like you really had a chance, and it's just like how important it is to make the tournament. What a big kind of just marketing difference that is. And to Mike Weemuth, like what that does to your chip stack of just making the tournament or not, the fact that you were that damn close and you couldn't get it done, it sucks. And it makes for a much more rougher and tumultuous offseason, and just adds a ton more pressure to next season.
All of that is true. And again, especially in a year where the bubble was this bad,
right?
To not be able to just seal the deal. I mean, again, and we talked about, would one win out of the 2 against Northwestern have been sufficient? Maybe. The big difference between 19 and 13 with an extra quad 2 win and 18 and 14 without. Would keeping it close in any or all of those games, against Illinois, Ohio State, or Purdue, would that have made a difference? Maybe. I think it probably would have taken like maybe 1 out of column A and 1 out of column B, or maybe 2 out of one column and not any out of the other. But again, if you miss the tournament this year, and Auburn fits right into this category, and so does Oklahoma, it means you squandered a ton of chances against what was a historically weak bubble. And I don't think, frankly, that there's a lot of positives that you can glean from being close in this particular year. And like you said, no one got screwed. Like last year, ironically, I think Darren DeVries' West Virginia squad probably got screwed. And that goes back to the North Carolina getting put in and the committee just deciding to go off script in terms of what metrics they were using. But that was not the case this year. So all that said,
real quick, just one other thing on this is we've kind of looked at it from this angle, like, damn, you're so close, and just, can you change one thing or the other? The other way to look at it is, I mean, this is not probably how I'm going to look at it, but you do have a 1-point win, double overtime at UCLA, where I was at, and Indiana had that game and really found a way. That game should not have gone to overtime. They got really, lucky's not right, but that was a very close game. And then you have the overtime win at home against Wisconsin. Galen, there's a world where if those two get flipped, you're suddenly looking at a season where you're not close to making the tournament. You're nowhere near. I don't know what that does. The end of, you now have lost like 8 of 10. You're 16 and 14 and 7 and 12 in the Big Ten. Maybe that's the odd silver lining, is that it isn't as bad as it could have been. Because if those two wins turn into losses, they easily could have. This season looks really rough.
No, I agree. It's an interesting thought experiment. And obviously, I think when you miss the tournament, you always kind of go back and you look and say, well, gosh, if this win had happened or if that win had happened, X, Y, and Z. Taking exactly what you just said, if Indiana lost the USC and Oregon games, that
UCLA.
would excuse me, the UCLA and the UCLA. Wow, I blew that all the way around. But that would have
all the wrong Pac-12 teams.
Based on Bart Torvik's little team cast, just those two losses would have dropped Indiana from the 4th team out of the field to the 26th team out of the field. If both of those had been losses. So
and then they would have lost 9 of their last 11.
Yeah. With a win, it would have been kind of funny because the 4 wins they would have had in their last, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. The 4 wins out of their last 17 they would have had in that scenario would have been Minnesota at home, Oregon at home, Rutgers on the road, and Purdue. So this it is interesting how much heavy lifting the UCLA and Wisconsin games did to prop this team up. And
because you add, I mean, before the Rutgers game, they lost 4 in a row. It's like that makes it like they would have lost like 13 of 17 to fit. I mean, it just would have, it could have been a lot worse. And maybe, history will tell. I think that's what's interesting about this season. History will tell us in a couple of years, did we really come close to getting into the tournament? Or was this a year where it's like, damn, it actually could have been a lot worse. And this was the best outcome of what it could have been. Don't know.
I don't know either. Don't care to speculate on it.
No.
And it's even if you had just, so we're not playing with the math. If you had swapped, let's say you have those same losses. You lose to UCLA, you lose to Wisconsin, but you beat Nebraska and you beat Northwestern in the home game. You're still not in the field. You're 7th out in that scenario, according to Torvik. And so that's, I think, what you got to keep in mind is that this team was closer to being way out than they were being in. And that's a good way, to go ahead and tell everybody what I think you already know, which is that Indiana turned down the Crown tournament. They're not playing in that, which we talked about, Scott, and I ended up recording a video on that about why Indiana didn't or isn't going to play in the Crown. It's interesting because like Rutgers is now playing in the Crown alongside a bunch of other teams that were just on the outside looking in. I think Colorado is in the Crown. When we talked about this before, my argument was pretty straightforward, which is that you've got a bunch of expiring eligibility cases on this IU team. You've got players that are going to want to get into the portal, and the timing on the Crown, where you don't play the games until April 1st for that first round, is just really not conducive to getting ready for a portal that's going to open on the 7th. There was a real good shot Indiana wasn't going to have enough players to play in that game. Now, it does make it interesting when you look at the other teams that have decided that they are going to play in the Crown, trying to compare and contrast. But this does feel like one of those situations where, Indiana probably needed to just say the season's over, that's it. But on the other hand, it does bring up the question of, okay, at what point does Indiana run out of excuses on that front in terms of like, well, we don't have a roster. They're going to have to figure out a way to change the way the roster composition works, not just for the idea of a conference, like a postseason tournament, but just for roster continuity, which, as we talked about, is something that Indiana is missing and likely going to be missing a lot of going into this upcoming season, as they'll probably have to get a whole bunch of new players.
On the last podcast, I was talking about that, how they shouldn't turn down the Crown. It was more, I don't like it from a spot of arrogance where it's just like, that's beneath us. I think the point, what you laid out is totally valid. It makes sense. I agree with all of it. I don't disagree. And like, there's probably not the players to play in the Crown. It doesn't do any good to play 2 players and a bunch of walk-ons or something. Although I kind of joked about it in one of the comments. And you're not going to do what Nebraska did, because you're really, none of the pieces from this year, or very few of the pieces, are probably going to be foundational big pieces that go into next year. You're not doing much. But my point still stands, is so everything you said is valid. I agree with it. There's no logical sense in playing the Crown. My point is I was kind of joking with you too, is like, But Galen, do you work for IU? Which you do. But it's like, are you the athletic director? Do you work for IU athletics? Do you work for IU basketball? Like, no. You made a very valid case of this is why the Crown doesn't make sense for us. The fact that it's really just radio silence from IU, and now you go into your third offseason where it's just, hey, trust us. We're going to figure this out. We're going to do well. And we have nothing to look forward to outside of portal announcements of guys that, unfortunately, we have a track record of none of them really turning out to being pieces that are going to take this team over the last 3 years to the tournament. My thing is like, fine, don't play the Crown for every reason you laid out. Do something. Have a marketing event. Have a positive something. Have an event at Assembly Hall. Have people get there and shoot layups with the new players. Have a meet and greet. Do something that maybe feels like beneath you for a program, but it's like, hey, you're there now. And that, I think that's maybe more what I'm getting across, or what I'm feeling is that's fine. You don't need to do it, but I just think you're missing an opportunity if you're going into another offseason of just a void of no information, nothing positive to look for. People are bummed. The Crown probably wouldn't have solved any of those things because you probably go and you play players that are new or different. So I get all that. I just think it's a moment of like, I think it's bad marketing to just have 6 months of silence. So that would be my push to IU athletics, is like, do something that's going to try to engage the fan base in a positive way. I don't know what that is. It's not my job to figure that out. But I think that's the feeling I was getting at with the Crown, is like, I just hate that another season ends with a thud. And then it's like, hey, we'll see you in October.
Well, yes. And I also think, as you and I have talked about many times, one of the problems you have with this team is the same problem you had with last year's team, same problem you had with the team the year before, which is that there's not much of a relationship between the players and the fans. There's not much of a relationship, except a very transactional one right now, between the program and the fans. And what you just laid out about some kind of a meet and greet or some kind of an event where you could maybe bring the fans closer to the players. I think, the level to which people abandoned the season this year when things got to going badly was a direct result of having a coach that I still think most of the fan base doesn't know that much about, an assistant group that no one really knows anything about, and a group of players that, outside of Lamar Wilkerson, we never really got a chance to know in any meaningful way. And so when things started to go bad in February, I don't know that anybody really had anything to latch onto with this team. When things went down the stretch, I don't think anybody was particularly sentimental about this team or seeing these guys one more time. It felt like a very transitory situation. And look, you're going to get that in the portal era to some degree, but you can take steps to address that and to try to connect the players to the fans, to try to connect the coaches more to the fans. I just don't think that there was enough of an effort there to make that happen. It certainly didn't have the resonance that you would have hoped that would have. And so I'm not I'm not really, as we've heard, I don't think being in the Crown makes a huge difference whatsoever, but it does essentially close the door on a season that a lot of people never really bothered to even open the door and walk through, because when you're in wait and see mode and there's really not much to go see once you're in wait and see mode and it's over, it's like, well, what did I really miss anything? And this year the answer was kind of no. Like this will be one of those seasons that goes down as a year where I don't know that a whole lot of memories were made, and certainly not much in the way of good memories were made by the fans in relation to what the team did.
One last question for you about the Crown, less IU related, although somewhat IU tangentially. They put together a field, and there's Minnesota and Rutgers are in there, oddly West Virginia, DeVries' former team. Everything you laid out, like Indiana's in a spot where it's like, look, we don't have players. Like half the guys are probably gone. They don't want to play. They don't want to play places and get injured and all that. I do wonder, though, at some point, is Fox like going to say, hey, that's fantastic. Remember that check we wrote for the Big Ten Network? Guess who doesn't care? Guess who's playing in the Crown? You are. Figure it out. And I understand what you're saying, and I do wonder, but at some point, does Fox just like, hey, y'all got to figure this out? because we need to have teams in this crown. This is part of our package. And I wonder if there's a point where Fox is like, hey, Indiana, you're a name. Like, we would love to have you as something we could sell. You haven't done this 4 years in a row or 3 years in a row. You basically turned us down. Guess who's getting the worst time slots next year? Guess who we're not going to promote in a preseason tournament? Like, I just, to think that Fox has no leverage here, I think is also a little bit silly. Like, I wonder at some point if Fox is like, hey, Indiana, we don't care anymore. We want to promote you. And if you don't do this, like, there will be some sort of repercussions next year.
Well, fortunately, they didn't turn it down 3 years in a row because it's only been in existence for 2 years.
Yeah.
But they did turn it down last year. They turned it down this year. Now, last year, I think there was a legitimate
coaching change thing. Yeah.
Changing coaches. And I mean, you look at the teams in the crown this year, and it's Oklahoma, Colorado, Baylor, Minnesota, Stanford, West Virginia, Rutgers, Creighton. None of those teams are making coaching changes at this point. And so there's some stability. There's less of an excuse for Indiana this time around, other than, well, a bunch of our players are graduating. But again, this is where you're going to have some more stability and more continuity in roster building, because it does look not great for Indiana to have just blown it off. Now, it is interesting because, like, some of the way that this is set up is, again, it's just so incompatible with the portal dates. And I think ultimately the whole concept of when the crown happens needs to change.
Yeah.
Or when the portal happens needs to change. That's where I think there's probably still some cushion, because I think IU could come back to what you just said. If you were Fox and I was Indiana, I'd be like, how do you expect us to figure all of this out while also having to deal with this relatively arbitrary deadline that changed from last year to this year? But I do think after a while, if the crown is still around,
I hear you. Oh, you're going to have 3 games on BTN Plus. Do you want 4? Like, we got some 10 o'clock starts for you.
I mean, Indiana's already got 2. It's not like they can put any more games on BTN Plus. But
no,
I
don't want to think of like bad. There's actually nobody on the network I don't like. Was like, we'll give you the worst color commentators.
Whole season's on Peacock, I think, is what you're reaching for here.
Right.
But I look. I don't know that it's that much money. Like, Indiana's money is guaranteed through Big Ten Network and through the conference distributions for revenue.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's that. But I am interested, because, like, the crown went from 16 to 8 this year. So they cut the field in half. They changed the format. When they're doing that after year 1,
yeah,
I think you can safely say it's not just Indiana that has a problem with the way that this is set up and how it's incompatible if you have to do a roster reboot.
No, everything you laid out, the timing, it's all wrong. I just look at it as, like, at some point, if Fox is like, hey, this is something we want to do to make money, because Fox is not going to get the NCAA basketball tournament. I don't know when those rights are up, like at CBS's. It's like, hey, we want to do this. We want to make some money. If Fox wants to make this work, it does feel like at some point they will start to lever and be like, look, guys, you got to start making this happen. Like, teams just don't get the opportunity to opt out. Anyway, who cares? We're not doing it.
Well, but where it does matter is in roster construction. And this was, but before we get to that, there's one other news item I wanted to hit, which was this news item that popped up today. And this was the Extra Points newsletter that is crafted by Matt Brown, which is an interesting newsletter. He does a lot of investigative reporting and FOIA requests around college athletics. And but he posted the financials for athletic departments as far as their basketball programs were concerned for the 2024-25 fiscal year. And not surprisingly, given that Indiana bought out Mike Woodson and bought out Mike Woodson's assistants and bought out Darren DeVries and one of Darren DeVries' assistants to come to Indiana, not surprisingly, Indiana on the books spent a tremendous amount of money on their basketball program, $32 million last year, Scott. That was a couple of standard deviations above the second place team in terms of the budget spend, which was Tennessee, who spent $23.1 million. It looked bad. It was, I think, poorly described when it came out, and it got picked up by a bunch of news sites as Indiana spent $32 million on basketball and got nothing for it, basically, like didn't get a tournament appearance or whatever. It's one of those things where I think it's important to understand that Indiana has always spent a lot of money on basketball. We've been talking about budgetary figures for basketball going back to the Crean era, where you look at the recruiting budget for IU, and it's always the biggest by far of any of the teams, at least the public teams that are going and participating and having to submit their numbers. Obviously, the private schools are not in this mix. But, man, it couldn't have been worse timed from a news story perspective, because you missed the tournament and you turn down the crown, and then it's like, wow, you guys spent $32 million on your basketball program and got literally nothing. And while technically true, it's not as damning as it seems, but it still isn't a great look for Indiana.
No, the comp is I'm driving back today. I was listening to one pod about the NBA and college basketball, but they were just lamenting the Sacramento Kings, which have, I think, the second worst record in the league right now in the NBA. They're the 8th highest payroll in the NBA right now. And it's like, there's just kind of cackles and jokes about like, damn, that's a lot of money to spend on the worst or second worst team in the NBA. Like, they're not trying to lose. Like, the Pacers are a unique spot, but like the Wizards are, middle of the pack in the NBA, and they're trying to lose. It's just like, it's never a good look to spend that much money and not have any kind of results. And yeah, it's because of some extenuating circumstances, but it's also because of mistakes you've made. Like, you're teams that have to buy out coaches to fire them and then buy out other coaches. It's because you're not doing things right. Similar to our roster, the fact that you have a roster that you can't compete in any postseason tournament because everyone's gone, that's a problem. That's not a good thing, unless you're making the tournament and making a deep run. And it's like, well, they're all leaving because they're going to the NBA. And this is, it's a topic for another time, but it is something where, money in college sports to me is not just a renewable resource that'll be there forever. If you continue, it's been there for Indiana this whole time, and they've always spent at a very high level, but you continue to spend and you continue to get no results. This is money coming from donors and people. And yes, some of it is coming from TV contracts, but not the money that's going to NIL, not the money that's going for the athletic department, some of this stuff. And so it's like, at some point, people get tired of putting that money in when you have season after season after season of this. But a different topic for a different discussion. But no, it's not a good look. And it is a little bit out of context, but it is in context because, we're kind of always, unfortunately, the whole time we've done this podcast, Galen, we're always a year away from a new coach or a year away from firing our coach. We've never been in a spot where we're 3 years comfortably either way of having a new coach or not firing our coach. Like, this, unfortunately, is where IU basketball is if you drop in, you're probably really close to us having just hired a coach or getting ready to fire a coach, which are both expensive events.
Yeah, actually, the only years that I was thinking about it that don't fit into that paradigm are probably 2011, 2012, and 2013. We've been doing the show since 2009. And yeah, ever since then, it's been, Crean, Death Watch, and then Archie Miller gets hired, and then it's Archie Miller, Death Watch, and then so on and so forth. But yeah, look, if you want the straight numbers, IU has always spent a lot of money on basketball. We talked about that before, and that's not a bad thing. And it actually, I will say, the whole debate today at least allowed us to go through this idea of, well, the people that would argue that Indiana isn't resourcing their basketball program properly, which I've heard now that football's good, there's been this assumption that, well, they moved all the money to football. It's like, no, they're still spending a lot of money on basketball. But in 2022, Indiana spent roughly $16 million on basketball. In 2023, they spent about $17 million. And then in 2024, they spent about $20 million. That is a lot of money. The top end operational budgets in college basketball are between 14 and $18 million, generally speaking. There's some that peak over that on a year-by-year basis, depending on things. So Indiana's been spending money. And look, that 3-year stretch, you had one NCAA tournament appearance. And so there is, in the misapplied numbers, something to focus on here, which is that Indiana is not getting good ROI. As our friend Bob Moats from the Back Home Network noted, it's possible that the numbers are wrong and that the ROI hasn't been as bad as it looks, and that Indiana still needs much better ROI on what they're spending on their basketball program. And I think that's the reasonable place to land on all of this. So if you saw that story out there, folks, don't freak. But I would also keep in mind that for the amount of money Indiana spends, and they, it's not like Indiana stopped caring about their basketball program. It's just they have not gotten the results that they should have gotten out of their basketball program, given the amount of money that has been spent, even though what you saw today online was a funhouse look at the budget based upon two separate buyouts happening simultaneously, one outgoing and one incoming.
Yeah, no. And I mean, and the other way to look at it too is where I still think we're in a good position is up to this point. The difference with football for years, it's like you had to get them to spend the money. And I do think we lost on coaches based on our inability to really pay. We would lose assistants because it's like that wasn't our deal. I don't think we've been in a position where we've lost a coach that we wanted to hire or a player we wanted an NIL because of money. We've made decisions that aren't working out. You're getting guys in NIL and it's like those guys didn't work out. You're hiring coaches, but I don't think there's ever been a position where it's like, man, we really wanted to hire this coach. We just couldn't afford it. Like, all the Brad Stevens talk, it's like Brad Stevens wanted to come here. It wasn't like we didn't get him because we couldn't put together the dollars. And I think the same goes for all the players. I think there's very few players where money was the issue. I think it's other things. So, I mean, that's at least maybe the positive way to look at it is we just need to make better decisions with where and how we're spending our dollars. But I don't think we've ever been in a point where it's like we can't compete dollar-wise.
Well, no, and look, just cut to the chase. The coaches that have been here over the course of the last 11 years have not done a good job with the vast resources that they've had at their disposal. And that includes Darren DeVries in year one, which is what we're going to talk about in the final part of this podcast. But first, we'll take a quick break. You're not going to want to miss this next segment, folks, as we're going to go roster by roster through some of the teams out there and compare what Indiana did versus what their competitors did over the course of the 2025 and 2026 seasons. So stick with us. Back right after this on CrimsonCast here on the Back Home Network.
When the final buzzer sounds in Bloomington, the conversation starts here. The assembly call is IU basketball. Live post-game shows, smart midweek breakdowns, and no empty hot takes. Jared Morris, Coach Brian Tonsoni, Andy Bottoms, and Ryan Phillips dissect lineups, sets, and recruiting so you know what really happened and what it means for the Big Ten season, March, and beyond. Join the live chat on YouTube, then catch the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Just search Assembly Call and be part of Hoosier Nation's most trusted post-game tradition.
Back here on CrimsonCast, Galen, Clavio, Scott Caulfield joining you. Thank you for joining us, folks. And just a reminder, we've got a ton of content all across Indiana sports, across the entire network, right here on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, follow along Sideline Stories, Assembly Call, Big Red Carpet with Rhett Lewis.
Omar Cooper Jr. interview.
Yeah, the Omar Cooper Jr. interview, if you haven't caught it yet, is absolutely amazing. Yeah. And we've got other great shows as well. So be sure to tune in.
Possibly first-round pick, Omar Cooper Jr.
I think likely first-round pick. So we'll have a lot more coming here over the next few weeks as spring ball is going to get going. We've got Indiana Pro Day. I will be at Indiana Pro Day to cover that. And we'll have plenty of more amazing stuff, I think, coming up here relatively soon. So stick with us here on the Back Home Network as we cover IU athletics broadly going into March, April, and then the summertime. All right. I wanted to talk about last offseason, the hiring of Darren DeVries, the way the roster came together. I think everybody has now acknowledged very plainly the roster that Indiana put together was not sufficient for what Indiana needed to do in the Big Ten to be competitive. I don't think that there's any controversy there. In fact, for a lot of people, that's become that's been something that's been used as exculpatory evidence for any issues with coaching or schematic with this team. Is like, well, the roster just wasn't sufficient. Now, the problem is that's also something that the coach has a big part in.
He wasn't just given the roster.
But I also think it's worth noting that there's a lot of elements about both roster building in general and the overall situation with IU and Darren DeVries that are contextually important to understand how Indiana got to where they got to. So what I want to do is walk through some things that maybe many of you are familiar with, maybe some of you have forgotten about or were not aware of, because I think it's important for us to really understand how did Indiana get to where they missed the NCAA tournament again? Like how did we find ourselves once again in this same spot when, frankly, that was not the energy that people entered the season with. Right. So what I want people to keep in mind is that last year, what you had was a situation where Indiana decides they're going to go hire Darren DeVries. What the thought process was behind that, I don't know that we ever completely heard, but I think a lot of it had to do with DeVries' team kind of overachieving relative to their losing Tucker DeVries early on in the season, almost making the NCAA tournament, beating Kansas at Kansas, beating 2 top 10 teams in Atlantis early in the season where IU was at. Like, all of those things came together. So they hired
and him doing it, basically rebuilding the entire West Virginia roster.
Right. And so you look at those things and you say to yourself, all right, I understand why Indiana wanted to go with Darren DeVries. Now, we heard a lot about the timing being an issue, and this is where there's a couple of different elements of timing that people need to keep in mind when it comes to how Indiana went through all of this. So Indiana last year, they made the announcement that they were going to hire Darren DeVries. The announcement happened on March 18th. So that would mean you would think, okay, they've talked for a while before the announcement has happened. I think the rumor hit and it was confirmed on the 17th, and I think the press conference was the next day. I believe that was the sequence. So the portal, the transfer portal, officially opened on March 24th of last year. So that was a week's worth of time. And many people have argued, oh, well, Darren DeVries didn't have enough time to go into the portal properly. And it's true that last year, Darren DeVries was hired a little on the late side compared to, say, Jay Lucas, who was hired by Miami. Jay Lucas was hired on March 6th. They knew Jen Larrañaga was retiring. And so they go out, they get Jay Lucas, and he's got a couple of weeks to put a staff together that get things rolling. But I do think it's worth noting that if you look at a couple of other coaches that were hired last year, the hire of DeVries was not as late as you would think compared to some of the other hires that were out there. So just as an example, or a couple of examples here, Ben McCollum gets hired by Iowa. It's officially announced on March 24th. So 6 days after Darren DeVries is announced and starts at Indiana, and the day that the portal opens, basically, is when he gets announced. Ryan Odom, who was hired by Virginia, gets announced on March 22nd, 2 days before the portal, 4 days after DeVries. Kevin Willard moves to Villanova. I forgot how funny that whole saga was, the Kevin Willard trying to consciously uncouple from Maryland saga. Yeah. Kevin Willard doesn't get hired at Villanova until March 30th. Bucky McMillan gets hired at Texas A&M April 5th. Sean Miller gets hired at Texas on March 24th, again, 6 days after DeVries and the day the portal opens. Will Wade gets hired March 23rd at NC State. Richard Pitino, I've got Chris Mack on the brain for some reason. He used to coach at Xavier. Richard Pitino gets hired at Xavier on March 25th. And finally, Buzz Williams gets hired on April 1st. Now, I've thrown all those names in the hat there because it's a mix of teams that made the tournament this year with a lot of roster turnover and teams that did not. Our friend Mike Weemuth from X's and Joe's, an excellent show that you should be watching if you like college basketball, had this tweet yesterday. The 3 slowest teams to fill their full recruiting staffs under year one coaches all missed the NCAA tournament this year. Maryland, who didn't get their full recruiting staff of assistants filled until April 28th. IU, Indiana University, who didn't get theirs filled to the 30th. And West Virginia, who didn't get theirs filled until May 12th. Miami, Virginia, Iowa, Villanova, Texas, and NC State all had full staffs between April 2nd and April 15th. Now, some of those coaches brought their staffs with them. Some of them patchworked them together from various things. People have asked, why didn't Darren DeVries bring his staff from West Virginia? And so I think it's important to understand not just why he only brought one staff member, but also why there weren't more players that came with him.
Right.
So let me call up the West Virginia roster and coaching staff from last year. For those of you who are watching along on YouTube or Spotify, you'll be able to see this. So let's talk about the assistants first. So this was a staff that DeVries had assembled at West Virginia, and it was comprised of a bunch of different pieces. So the lead recruiter and associate head coach was former Illinois assistant Chester Frazier. Chester Frazier ended up going to Virginia Tech, did not end up coming with DeVries to Indiana. I don't exactly know why. Maybe it's just he didn't want to coach at Indiana being an Illinois guy. Maybe he had a better offer from, I think it's Mike Young as the head coach at Virginia Tech. Then you look at the rest of the coaches. Well, Nick Norton came with DeVries to Indiana. Corey Barnett, a name very familiar to people at Indiana, former player here, ended up getting the head coaching job at Oral Roberts, so that meant he didn't come. The other assistant coach was Tom Ostrom, who many of you will remember as being the lead assistant for Archie Miller. Probably not a guy that was interested in coming back to Bloomington. Right. And he ended up not going into coaching at all this last year, but just got named the interim GM for St. John's. And then Cavell Witter, who was the fourth assistant, basically, or fifth assistant, is at USC Upstate now. So that was the assistant. So you look at that, and I'm going to call this off for a second. You're already a little bit behind the eight ball if you're Darren DeVries, because your assistant pool, you don't really have a lot of guys that you're bringing with you. And what complicated it even more was that Darren DeVries, right off the bat, we heard behind the scenes, there was a guy that he had his heart set on, who he had coached with before, who he was planning on bringing in as his leading recruiter, and that was Preston Murphy, I think maybe lead recruiter, and I might be the associate head coach at Alabama under Nate Oates. And obviously you look at the success that Alabama's had the last few years, it's like they know what they're doing. That was exciting. It's like, wow, they're going to pull Preston Murphy off a team that just made the Final Four the year before. Well, that ends up in a protracted back and forth negotiations wise. And on April 11th, word comes down that Preston Murphy's staying at Alabama. They had also pivoted during that time to try to bring in Achoki Maikabu. I think I probably butchered his name. Recruiting assistant at Texas Tech, another guy that Darren DeVries had coached with. He also gets a counteroffer from Texas Tech. He ends up also not coming. So it ends up being almost the middle of April before you get Kenny Johnson hired, right, before you get, Rod Clark ends up coming a little bit later. Drew Adams ends up coming a little later. So there's kind of two ways to look at this. Either you look at it and say, well, damn, Indiana kind of got screwed by the fact that those guys ended up not moving. But the flip side of it is you couldn't afford to wait that long to fill your recruiting staff. And you either had to get those negotiations done quickly and get those guys in, or you had to just move on to the next people. Waiting that long really did, at least from the outside, look like it put Indiana well behind a lot of their competitors in being competitive for the top players.
Yeah, well, that it flows right into the portal, the players, and what I know we'll talk about the players here in a second. Just looking at the West Virginia roster, there's only like three guys who could, or four. Tucker DeVries was one. The rest were, three portal opportunities. The rest were all seniors, and this is, what I find interesting. And I'm trying to jump ahead, but it's where my mind goes to on this is, what, for as much as, we want to recreate Cignetti everywhere we go, you look at what he was able to do. Is it wasn't just that Cignetti had success at low levels and had success as a head coach. Is like he was going to port over, I'm bringing these guys and I'm bringing my assistants and I'm bringing it all with me. Now, again, maybe Cignetti, obviously, I'm assuming said that and then was able to execute on. I mean, we've seen Cignetti does what he says. It's very possible that maybe DeVries was saying something similar in interviews of like, hey, I'm going to bring all the three players that I have that are available are going to come with me. Sorry, four with Tucker. Four. And, maybe two or three of those assistants are going to come. But you do have to look at it. If you're Dolson, you see this, it's like, all right, well, as you mentioned, one assistant is a former Archie assistant. So like, that's not awesome. And again, not that you have to hire guys based on who their assistants are, but it's like, if you're trying to recreate what is successful, which is a coach who can bring an assistant pool and bring some players with him, right off the bat, it's like it doesn't look like that's similar here. Now, this is not apples to apples. There might not have been another option there, but it's like that's where my mind goes to is it was pretty obvious to see in retrospect. Now it's like DeVries was going to kind of come. This was always going to be a problem.
Well, it looks like it now, but this is where I think you have to have some allowance for the idea that the portal era is brand new. And the idea that you would have to have a full coaching staff or close to it assembled so quickly is not necessarily how things have gone historically, because what you're normally doing is you're trying to re-recruit the guys that were on the roster, which Indiana chose not to do. They decided to move on and have a fresh start. You're not in such a rush historically to try to get guys in to manage the portal, and now you are. And I think that Indiana ends up becoming a bit of a cautionary tale because it wasn't just the assistants, it was also the players. And this was something that you just mentioned. I want to call that graphic back up, because if you look at West Virginia,
can we stop being a cautionary tale? It's like we're a cautionary tale with like the going too hard on your own penalties. It's like it seems not getting a good shoe contract in the 90s. It's like I'm just in basketball. I'm tired of being the cautionary. I'd rather be the positive tale.
I would rather be the Harvard Business School case study. In the positive. Let us be Apple and not Enron. Would be the idea here, right? Not that we're Enron. I'm just saying.
No.
But look at West Virginia's roster for last year, because I've heard a lot of people be like, well, it's really suspicious that DeVries didn't have any players follow him. Well, he did. Tucker DeVries was, I think, the 16th ranked player in the entire portal last year. That's a pretty big pickup. And even though Tucker didn't have the best of seasons, I think he was probably injured. He was also having to essentially be a playmaker down the stretch because Indiana was really struggling to trigger offense. But that is, you can't just brush off that DeVries came to Indiana with his dad. But you look down the rest of the roster for West Virginia. Small was out of eligibility. Okane was out of eligibility. Yusufa was out of eligibility. Andre was out of eligibility. Auer was out of eligibility. And then you look at the rest of the players, and it's like you didn't really lose a lot. Hansberry would have been a nice transfer, but he was a Chester Frazier recruit. Chester Frazier goes to Virginia Tech. He goes with him. I don't blame him for that. A lot of times players are going to have closer relationships with the assistant coaches that brought them in. Powell was a nice looking piece. He went to North Carolina. I will not begrudge anybody the opportunity to go play at North Carolina if it's there. And he only played 41% of available minutes this year. And then Sincere Harris had played in the Big Ten and ended up transferring to Cincinnati instead, and was not a particularly good player this year, nor did he play that much. The rest of their players, you had one guy that went to Murray State and one guy that went to Northeastern, which tells you those were not power conference caliber players. So it looks to some degree like DeVries brought what he could, knowing then, though, that he would have to go and get pieces in the portal. That's where, however, going back to what you said, you got to get on the ball faster if you know you're coming in with fewer people. And you've created a situation at that point where you really have to scramble to try to put a roster together that's going to be competitive. Now, this is where I want to first show the graphic of what Indiana ended up bringing in, just so everybody remembers. This is what Indiana came into this season with. These are the guys that ended up playing. Like I don't have Harris or Drake on here because they never played. I don't have Asimovich. But you bring in Lamar Wilkerson from Sam Houston State. You bring in Tatum Connerway from Troy. And those were both big pickups. Those are both guys, and obviously Lamar contributed greatly. You've got DeVries, and I've got little asterisks on this chart next to players who I would call them culture imports, guys that either came with the coach or guys that had played for the coach previously, which is why Connor Enright is on there. Even though he transferred from DePaul, he played at Drake under Darren DeVries before DeVries went to West Virginia. And then you go down the rest of the list.
And that should kind of almost count as like just like the kid for West Virginia left to go to his first coach. Like this is kind of like you do have to be fair and honest here, where like Enright is kind of a DeVries port from not West Virginia, but from his background. So go ahead. But yeah,
it's an important part of this. And it's where I want people to understand, like, there's a bunch of different ways to approach this. Some people went fresh, brand new, all new people. Some people tried to bring their culture with them, and that's what you'll see. Going through the rest of the roster, Reed Bailey comes from Davidson. Sam Alexis was a backup who had been injured at Florida. Nick Dorn came from Elon. Josiah Miles came from North Florida. Trent Sisley came as a freshman. And we had concerns about, well, how well will these lower division players translate up to the Big Ten level? In Lamar Wilkerson's case, they translated really well.
Right.
In the rest of the cases, it was a lot more uneven or just not good. So let me launch into a couple of different looks here. I want to go last year first. There's 3 teams in particular I want to look at, and then I want to go into this year's teams. So Dusty May has gotten a lot of talk, and I think it's important.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Dusty May got hired last year, not last cycle, but 2 seasons ago, essentially. And so he went into the portal. What did he have at his disposal? What did he bring in that first year? And what did Michigan do? So Dusty May, so first of all, it's important to remember that the portal opened earlier in the 2024 cycle. The portal opened on March 18th and was open for 45 days.
It's almost like the NCAA, it feels like there needs to be like a little more continuity here. Like it's weird. It's almost like the rules are just changing every year.
Yeah, it's like they're just kind of arbitrarily slung around. I know.
Yeah, no, imagine if you actually picked a date and just had a date that made sense year over year. Anyway, go ahead.
So Dusty gets hired 6 days after the portal opens. And this is the team that he assembles. He brings one culture transfer with him from Florida Atlantic. That's Vlad Golden. He's got 2 returning players, Will Cheddar, who ended up playing 40% of available minutes last year for Michigan, and then Namari Burnett, who ended up playing 65% of available minutes last year for Michigan. He has 2 incoming freshmen, and then he's got a North Texas transfer, an Alabama transfer, an Auburn transfer, an Ohio State transfer, and Roddy Gale, and then Danny Wolf, who was the transfer from Yale. That team went 27-10 and was a 5 seed. So I would look at that and say, well, this is an interesting mix. You're not starting from scratch. You've got 2 returning players. You've got a transfer you're bringing with you. You've got 2 incoming freshmen, and then you've got what are essentially like 5 or 6 additional pieces that you're working with. And that worked really well for Dusty, and obviously they used that as a platform for this year's team, which is one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country.
Although I will say, I mean, like, what I will say on the positive side for what DeVries could do is they did use that as a platform, and like Burnett is still on the team. But when you look at, 4 of the top 5 players of that team that have the most usage and offensive rating are all new players this year. So it's not like Dusty did a good job that first year, but it's not like all of those guys became the core of the team that is currently, number 1 in the country and went 31-3. He basically got 4 new players this year. So, I mean, it's not illogical to think that we could do that. It seems insane at this point, but the core of Michigan right now is a brand new team from the year before.
You've still got Will Cheddar. You've still got Burnett. You have Trey McKinney as a freshman. You had LJ Kaysen, but he's out for the season now with a knee injury. But yeah, the guys that you look at Michigan, it's Lendeborg, who transferred from UAB. It's Elliot Cadeau, who transferred from North Carolina. It's Morris Johnson, who transferred from Illinois. And then it's Ade Mara, who transferred from UCLA.
Right.
I mean, Dusty did an amazing job in the portal the next year. But he had to have that foundation to make Michigan an attractive place for people to go. And he had to have, I think, a culture built to bring players into. So then let's look at, another scenario that played out from that 2024 hire, which was Mark Pope. Gets hired at Kentucky. He gets hired April 12th. That is almost a month after the transfer portal opens in 2024. So here's what he does. He has 1 culture transfer from BYU in Robinson. He has 3 incoming freshmen. All of them were pretty good. And then he has an Oklahoma transfer, a Drexel transfer, a Wake Forest transfer, an Oklahoma State transfer, a Dayton transfer, and a Fairleigh Dickinson transfer. And molds that team into one that was a 3 seed. They were 24-12. Now, that's a case where it was a good job by Pope, but he also was starting, I think, from a position where, Kentucky has been pretty consistently successful. They were coming off a 23-10 season where they were also a 3 seed. It's just interesting to me because they didn't bring anybody back from that previous team, and they had to basically start from scratch. And they were able, with that mix of players, freshmen, 1 guy that came with Pope, and then a bunch of people from a variety of places, they were able to assemble a squad that didn't just make the tournament, but made the tournament and was a protected seed.
Right. Yeah. And this year he's kept like 2 of those players have become top contributors on a team that maybe is underperformed compared to that. But
Let me give you a third look or a third different coach to look at. And this, I think, was impressive given that the team he took over was 9-23 the previous year. And that's Mark Byington at Vanderbilt taking over for Jerry Stackhouse. So what does Byington do? He gets hired March 25th, again, a week after the portal is open. He brings one culture transfer with him in Carey. And then from there, the roster fills out. And Carey was played about 50% of available minutes. He wasn't that important to the mix. But he brings in 2 Virginia Tech transfers, a Michigan State transfer, a Boston College transfer, a North Texas transfer, a Cornell transfer, and a Davidson transfer, has 1 incoming freshman. And then he has Roberts, who only played 7% of available minutes that year. So you're not dealing with a situation where he brought a ton in, but he manages to put together a team that goes 20-13. They barely make the tournament. But again, it ends up building a basis for moving forward. And it, in part helps them to put themselves in a position like Tanner, that freshman that's on that list there, was a guy who played 82% of available minutes this year and was one of the most efficient scorers in the country. Like they did a really good job of building off of things and then adding to it in the portal that following year. Yep. So let's look at this year's rosters. So we mentioned Miami and Jay Lucas. So Jay Lucas had a big jump on the portal because he got hired on, like I said, the 6th of March. So a few weeks ahead of when the portal opened up, almost a month. Who does he bring in? Well, he has no returners whatsoever coming off of Larinaga's last team, which was not a good team. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 freshmen on this Miami team. And then you add Malik Renew from Indiana, our old friend, Donaldson from Michigan, Washington from New Mexico, a Mizzou transfer, and a TCU transfer. And that team's 25-7 and is a 7 seed. So for those who are like, well, gosh, how many coaches had to start from scratch with nobody on the roster? Miami's an example of where it happened and it worked. Now, did the jump start there, not just in terms of the portal, but in terms of assembling a talented group of coaches? Did that help? I'm sure it did. But that's a situation where Miami, who was coming off a worse season than Indiana the previous year, was able to figure it out. And, it's where if you're Miami, I think you really got to like the fact that Jay Lucas takes over a 7-24 team and turns them into a 24-7 team with a brand new roster.
Can you put that graphic back up real quick?
Yeah, there you go.
The thing that I want to look at just to highlight here is you have Henderson freshman, Allen freshman, Malovic freshman, Dovrat freshman, and Altunis freshman. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 freshmen on this team, a team that went 25-7. I'm just like pre getting annoyed with next year where, well, no, I mean, like Indiana, and you can take it down now. Like Indiana is going to have, 4 or 5 freshmen on the team next year. And I can already hear some of the, a bunch of young guys, you can't expect much out of them the first year. It's like, no, like there was a blend of, now you look at the way Miami played, Renew and Donaldson are getting the majority of the minutes, the majority of the scoring, but that's a team that has a ton of freshmen, a ton of young players, and you mix in 2 or 3 correct pieces. So I look at this as the most instructive of like, what can we do next year with the Indiana team? Because you have, a freshman class coming in, and, the idea of like, you can't do much with freshmen. It's like, no, if you have the right transfer pieces, you can do a lot. I mean, 27-4 is really good.
I do want to note, so calling Dovrat a freshman, that is a little bit of a misconception in that he's a freshman in eligibility, but he's played in Israel.
All right.
For several years.
But still, all right, so 4 freshmen.
Right. And this is where it's like trying to figure out how to fit the Euros into this mix is an interesting one. But your point is well taken, Scott. I mean, Sheldon Henderson is the only of the freshmen that has made, I think, an outsized impact. And he's played a ton of minutes, and he's a really good shooter. He's a nice swing man for them. He shot 62% from 2 this season. Allen contributed some, played about 50% of minutes. Malovec didn't play that much, and Altunis didn't play that much. But what was key to Miami is that Ernest Uday, who had a ton of prior experience at the power conference level, has come in and eaten up a decent amount of innings, has been hyper efficient as a scorer. We know Malik Renew, and Malik Renew had a season that I mean, like Malik Renew this year was like a hyper efficient version of Malik Renew from 2024. Much
Right.
better than the Malik Renew we saw last year, who just didn't get on the floor nearly as much, only played 47% of minutes. And then Trey Donaldson was able to eat a ton of innings, so to speak, and was one of the best assist men in the country. So one of the themes in all of this is the blend, the mix.
Yeah.
What does your coach and what does his staff do as they're looking at how these guys fit together and how they fit your system? And I think that's
last Miami, Florida take. Just two things. One, you and I were kind of joking about we'd love to see Purdue get a 3 seed so we could see if Painter could lose to a 14 seed, which he hasn't done yet. Now we do have the, let's all jump on the, Malik Renew, Miami, Florida bandwagon and just have them take out Purdue in the second round. But I've seen this on Twitter, and I love this idea, just a little side basketball thing with Miami, Miami, Florida, Miami of Ohio. Just whoever ends the season ranked higher, they get to just be Miami. And maybe it goes year over year, but it's like, I love when they're both in the tournament. Like whoever is better, like whoever finishes with a better season, it's just like, you're Miami, and the other one has to use their state.
What? I don't even know what to do with that, but okay.
I love it. Like, so like if Miami, Ohio gets farther, it's like, hey, we're Miami, you're Miami, Florida. Like just we don't have to be Miami of Ohio. We're just Miami. Like you get to battle for Miami rights. Like maybe that's what the crown should be. At the end of the season, both Miami teams just play.
Maybe we should workshop this idea some more, but okay. No. It's
derailment.
I'm kidding. Okay, let's go through some other teams. So one of the teams that's really fascinated me this year is also in the ACC, and that's Virginia. And Virginia is another team where you had no carryovers from the previous roster, and you had no culture transfers either. And this is, again, somewhat similar to what you had, although less extreme than Miami. This is a team that had a losing record the previous year. They were 15-17. A lot of that was because Tony Bennett retired suddenly. But
yeah, and then they had an interim coach, Sanchez, for like 1 year.
Yeah. And so they bring in Ryan Odom. And Ryan Odom, for those who don't remember, Ryan Odom was the head coach of Maryland-Baltimore County when they beat Virginia as a 16 seed. He coached at Utah State. He coached at VCU.
Wow, that must be the Benz for Virginia fans.
Well, it's also, the funny thing is Ryan Odom is Dave Odom's kid. Dave Odom, who you probably remember, was the Wake Forest coach back in the Tim Duncan days. So anyway, going back to the roster, what did Ryan Odom choose to do? Well, he had one freshman, essentially. He had one returning player, Gertrude, who only played 8% of minutes this year. So essentially a non-contributor. 2 European transfers, DeRitter and Grunlow. Now, a lot of people look at that and they're like, well, these guys are like too old. Well, DeRitter is 23. He is on the older side. Grunlow's, I think, only like 20. He's not a particularly old player. And it wasn't like these guys tore up the Euro League while they were there. I mean, DeRitter was a 9-5 essentially at Bilbao, and Grunlow was 8.5 and 5.5 in the German basketball league. The rest of the roster, not a lot of high major guys there. You got a guy from BYU, a guy from K-State, and then transfers from San Francisco, North Dakota State, Toledo, and UC Irvine. I have been fascinated with how this Virginia thing has come together and how well they pieced together a roster. And that was a roster where DeRitter, it looked like he was going to be declared ineligible and then eventually got declared eligible. So their season would have looked very different. But they ended up landing on a mix of players that has really been impressive in terms of just how well they played in both phases of the game. And again, a team that really had to start from scratch with only one player that has barely played on the roster.
Well, and a bunch of freshmen. The thing I think that I would say with Virginia when I look at them is, the ACC was definitely weaker this year. But Virginia kind of falls into that better version of what I thought IU was going to be this year, where for the most part, they're just beating all the teams they should. But then when they're, playing Duke, they lose, and North Carolina's kind of there. But they didn't play a lot of top 10 KenPom teams just because there's not those in the ACC. But that's a prime example of they took care of business and they did all the things they were supposed to do, and that gets you a 3 seed.
let's look at a couple of other teams that made the tournament, and then I want to look at some teams that didn't make the tournament. So Kevin Willard went a completely different direction. He goes from Maryland to Villanova. What does he do? Well, he brings a lot of culture transfers with him. Gapare, Palmer, and Pierce all transfer from Maryland. And of the three, only Palmer really played a lot of minutes this year. But he also had Perkins coming back, who played 73% of minutes. So this one reminds me a little bit of Dusty the previous year at Michigan, where he's got some pieces to play with. And then he's got a couple of freshmen in Jeffrey and Hodge and Lewis, and then transfers from Grand Canyon, James Madison, Long Beach State, and Temple. That team, and again, Willard gets hired on March 30th, and they end up as an 8 seed this year in the NCAA tournament. That's the other thing about Odom that's interesting. He gets hired March 22nd. Again, it's 4 days after DeVries gets hired at Indiana. But any thoughts on this Villanova roster?
Well, I mean, this one is a little bit less, I think provides less information for us just because you have so much porting from one team where you're not going to see that this year.
Well, but it's more, the idea is more like, as IU fans try to untangle what happened with the roster this year.
Yeah.
I look at this as saying, well, it can be helpful to bring a bunch of people that understand your system and know how it's supposed to work and marry them with different types of players. It's not an automatic that you're going to be a great team, but that was, I think, what Willard ended up winning the most games for a first-year head coach in the entire history of Villanova basketball.
Yeah.
They also got a guy in a Caden Lewis who has used a ton of possessions this year. He's a freshman, and he's not a terribly efficient scorer, but he's an amazing point guard. And that is another thing. And we've seen that now with a couple of different teams, Miami and Villanova. And I think you could probably look at Virginia and say similar things, like being able to rely on the point guard that you bring in to run the offense that you need run is a huge part of all of this. I mean, Virginia, going back to them, it's, Chance Mallory has played a lot at the point position, and his assist rate is 194th in the country. Dalen Hall has played more, and his assist rate is at 213th in the country. Like these were teams that were running offenses because they had people that could trigger the offense and actually do what needed to be done, which is, again, something that Indiana tried to do, bringing in Tate and Conaway and Connor Enright. It just never really worked the way that it looked like it might work on paper. But I think it definitely worked with Villanova and Miami and Virginia.
Yeah. Going back to Villanova, the 3 years under Kyle Neptune didn't play well, but they did play a postseason tournament every single year. Just side note. The other thing that I do see less roster, but just kind of digging into the records and all of this is you look at, Villanova, they finished the season ranked 33rd in KenPom. And, they don't really have a signature great win against a top 10 team, but they finished the season 24-7 and 15-5 in the ACC, the Big East. And, you could say, I'm going to try and do math here on the fly. You could say, well,
that's always fun with you.
It's very frightening. It's not, I barely do English and talking on the fly, let alone adding math to the categories here. But you could say, oh, well, the Big Ten is a better conference, which it is. But if you just say, all right, this year, just don't lose, just beat all the teams that aren't in the top 15 of KenPom, it's like you're adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more wins to this team. You're over 20 wins. Your losses are going to be Nebraska at home, Michigan State on the road, Michigan on the road, Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan State. And that's what Villanova did.
Right.
And so I do look at this also as you're right. It's roster construction. It's finding that right blend and putting it together. But it's also just, you don't need to go out and be Michigan and, be the top 10 team in the country. Just beat everybody else. And it's not that hard, but it's not that easy. It's not that hard. Just go, and you don't need to be the top tier, but just, you can't stub your foot all over the place as well.
It's what happened. It's what you have to do in your first year. I think you have to have a basis, and you have to, if you sink below that baseline, that's where you start to run into trouble, which the next couple of teams we'll look at who were failures from a roster construction perspective, I would say fit into that. Maryland under Buzz Williams, they brought in a transfer from A&M. He only played 10 games. They bring in Miles Rice. He only played 17. They brought in Washington from A&M and then tried to win with a bunch of freshmen. This did not work at all for Maryland. And that ends up creating a lot of problems for them just in terms of, Buzz Williams. I think a lot of people are questioning, like, is he going to be there long term? Right. Obviously, those freshmen will mature. Maybe this ends up being a long play. I think it's worth asking, as bad as the season went for Maryland, they were 12-21. Do they have enough of a basis now, given that Andre Mills played a lot, Darius Adams played a lot? You got a decent amount of contributions out of both of them. Is that your core? And now you can add additional pieces to them as you move forward. They've at least got pieces that should come back, obviously pending what happens in the portal. But that's been the other frustration for Indiana here, is that they did better than Maryland. They had a better season than Maryland, had a better roster than Maryland in terms of how the output was. But they've got less coming back probably than what Maryland will have coming back next year.
Well, and that was always the issue with the way this roster was constructed, and I've been kind of hitting it all season, is just you have this many seniors. You have to win. I mean, like, there is no, you're not even building culture because it's all gone at the end of this year. So you're basically building this on, like, we're trying to get it going immediately with that many seniors. And even the way that they have, you have Sicily as a freshman, you just don't play him enough. It's like, I guess that's where I continue to get frustrated with where we were this year, is this roster was built and played as if it's all for this year, which it was, because you are starting back at zero again. And that's, even looking at the Dusty May, where it's like 4 of the best guys are new guys, like there's still a couple pieces that he ported from, that came from year 1 to year 2. And I think that's the really frustrating and frightening thing, is you're redoing all of it. And the other thing that's bothersome is, based on this moving deadline of where the portal starts and begins, like, at least previous years, the portal was open during the tournament. So it kind of put the tournament teams in a bad position. The portal's opening later this year. So it's like, this is kind of not a great, like, all the teams that are in the tournament, by the time, if the first weekend, half the teams are out, like, they'll be able to just get ready for the portal just like we are.
No, it's actually disadvantageous for Indiana at this point to have the portal open as late as it's opening. You'd rather it was opening earlier, because you would have a little bit of an advantage, and you don't have that here. One other one I wanted to get to, which was Richard Pitino at Xavier. And again, brought in and again, the reason I'm laying all these out is not like, this is not intended to make excuses for IU, but it's also intended to say, you can't just say, well, the roster construction was horrible. You can see pieces of what the idea was by Darren DeVries in all of what we're seeing. And there is some luck involved in picking the right guys. And it's not necessarily a matter of, were there people that I brought with me, or were there people still on the roster? There's other coaches we could look at who had a mix of all of that. But I do think it's informative to understand, like, exactly what the picture looks like, because we tend to jump on these things and say definitively, well, that was a bad effort by this coach, or that was something that could have been gone a different direction if you had done it differently. I don't know if that was necessarily the case. There were clearly mistakes made, but that's why we're trying to lay all these out. So you look at Xavier, Pitino brought 2 players with him. He brings in a couple of one power conference transfer, but this one reminds me a little bit of this idea of, well, we're going to try to load up on players from the second tier of college basketball: North Dakota, UNLV, Belmont, Valparaiso, Montana, Boise State, Florida Atlantic. Like, that team did not compete effectively in the Big East this year. And so there are some lessons, I think, to be learned from that. I mean, we've seen some awesome players come from the lower reaches of Division I and be real good in the power conferences. Lamar Wilkerson being one, Dalton Connect, previously being a name that just comes to my mind. But it really is about individual evaluation at this point. And this is where, and we'll end with this, Scott, as we go into portal season, and as you hear names, you have to think about, well, the coaches are going to be privy to and focused on different types of information, different factors and variables than what we may be seeing even on the film. I mean, I remember Reed Bailey's film last year. It looked pretty good. It didn't really translate to this level. And that's where coaches have to be dead on with this, because you don't need to hit on every single player that you bring in. But for Indiana, with 3 freshmen coming in and an uncertain number of players returning, you might have to bring 5 or 6 major contributors in this portal. And it's clear that the evaluation process that happened last year for Indiana, even though you can see bits and pieces of it in all these other teams, just was not there. And that doesn't mean it's not going to be there forever. It can be fixed, it can be improved upon, but that's what has to happen. It can't be where it was at this year, because I don't think that that's a very good ending for next season if that's what you end up with, where you have another cycle where you miss on how these guys fit together and how they fit within having to play at the Big Ten level.
I think what I take from this is we just went through 7 or 8 coaches in their first year, whether last year or this year, who were able to make the tournament, and it happened in a variety of ways. There's guys who poured over a bunch of players. There's guys who went with young players, guys who went with a lot of seniors, guys who went with, people who, Euros, small conference move ups, a mix of both. I take away, there's not one answer here. Like, there's multiple ways to get there. The end result is like DeVries didn't get there in his first year. Like, whatever he did didn't work. And now you've got to figure out a way to make it work. There's a bunch of ways to get there. And maybe having his staff in place, maybe, Tucker DeVries was a great pickup, but coaching your son is tough. Like, that's just can't be easy at a high level. Maybe it's just a fresh start and you go with it. But I think, to me, the main takeaway is there's multiple ways to do this, but it needs to be done. And it wasn't done this year, and they need to find a better mix. And I think that's the thing that I'm also most disappointed in, is not just that they didn't make the tournament. It's that, it's not a great comp. I just you keep comping to IU, or I keep comping to IU football. Like, the season was fantastic. You lost to Notre Dame the first year. It's like, that sucked. And we were bummed, but I kind of left being like, damn, man, that team had something special. It's like, there's something brewing there. I think that's the thing that disappointed me the most this year, is not that we didn't make the tournament. It just didn't look like a team that was together, or like, you don't feel like, oh, there's something brewing here. Even take away the seniors and juniors, the senior aspect of it. It's not like I'm like, oh man, that team was locked in together and like they're building something. It just looked like a bunch of guys who were playing basketball and didn't seem to enjoy it that much playing together. And I think that's the thing that is frustrating and most concerning to me, is you put together this roster of both players and personalities, and it felt like the mix it didn't go well on the court, wins and losses wise, but just from an eye test, it didn't look like it was a ton of fun out there playing with that group. And so I think they have a lot of work to do. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get there, but I think most importantly, DeVries and his coaching staff, they need to see what is the team we're trying to build? What is our ethos? What's our vision? What kind of team do we want? And can we get players who both fit that mold athletically, but I think also mentally? And you missed it this year. You're going to run out of chances to continue doing it. You better damn well do it next year.
I couldn't agree more. I think Indiana gambled that going with experience, being the most experienced team, according to KenPom, in the entirety of Division I this year, was going to help them tide over, and they were going to be able to bring in some younger players who had an extra year of eligibility that would be the depth and the pieces that you could build around going into the following year, and you'd get everything set, and it didn't work. And now it is absolutely something you can't screw up a second time. And that's why they went out and hired a GM, and it's why they turned down the crown. And I think everybody is aware this wasn't good enough, and everybody's aware that at this point, you've got to get it right. And the amount of teams that did get it right, and it wasn't everybody, some teams did not get it right, but the number of teams that did get it right is one of those things, again, where you've got to figure it out the second time, because there are a limited number of chances that you're going to get it right at a school that is obviously very much interested in putting the resources forward to being competitive in basketball. And so,
but again, I look at Virginia. It's like, that's a first year coming off of, Virginia was 15-17 the year before, just in a complete, lost their coach, beginning of the year, like everything went wrong. you turn it around with basically a whole new roster and you go 27-4. You didn't beat Duke either time. You don't have a top 10 win, but you're 27-4. You're a 3 seed in the tournament. Yeah. And you're like, this is where I'll end, is like, that's what frustrates me is Virginia a Final Four team right now in my bracket? Probably not, but they are one upset away from a bracket just opening up, and like I could see them in a Final Four if, you know, their 2 seed or their 1 seed in their bracket loses, which the more times you put yourself in as a protected seed, the more chances that's going to happen, where it's just like suddenly the bracket breaks and it's like, oh, hey, we're playing a 14 seed in the Sweet 16.
If you're standing there watching the poker table, you're not going to win any hands.
That's true.
So that's I think the take home on all of this. But anyway,
it's a great call. Yeah.
Scott, as always, a pleasure. And we'll be back with more podcasting here on the Back Home Network and CrimsonCast over the course of the next few weeks. We'll have some tournament previews coming up and a lot more. So stick with us here on Back Home Network and CrimsonCast. For Scott Caulfield, I'm Galen Clavio. We will catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.